The sky over Seoul was a pale, clear blue. In a classroom on the 10th floor of a high school, Jin sat at his desk. He was not listening to the teacher talk about history. He was looking out the large window. He watched the clouds and the tall buildings. He liked to see how things fit together, how the city worked like a giant machine. Across the city, Miso was in a different kind of room. It was a meeting room in a tall office building. Her boss was talking, pointing at charts on a screen. Miso nodded, but her mind was somewhere else. She was thinking about the weekend. She was thinking about the small plant on her balcony that needed water. She was good at her job, but she often felt like a part in a machine she did not control. In a park, an old man named Mr. Park sat on a bench. The sun was warm on his face. He held a small bag of seeds and he tossed them onto the ground in front of him. Pigeons gathered, cooing and fighting over the food. His movements were slow and calm. His eyes, however, were sharp. They noticed everything. They noticed a young couple arguing quietly nearby. They noticed a businessman rushing through the park talking loudly on his phone. Mr. Park had seen many things in his long life. He found peace in watching the small, simple things. Then the shadows began to move. It was not the slow, gentle shift of a cloud passing over the sun. This was different. The light did not dim. It was stolen. A deep, dark shape slid across the face of the sun. Jin blinked and leaned closer to the window. The blue sky was being covered by something massive. It was not one thing, but many. They were huge, silent ships. They were a dark metallic gray, and their shapes were smooth and sharp at the same time. They made no sound. They just settled over the city, over the country, over the entire world like a lid being placed on a pot. In the meeting room, the screen went black. The lights in the ceiling flickered and died. Miso's boss stopped talking. A strange quiet fell over the room, broken only by the confused murmurs of her coworkers. In the park, the pigeons scattered in a panic. The businessman's loud voice cut off. He was staring at his phone, tapping the dark screen. Mr. Park did not look at his phone. He did not have one. He slowly stood up, his old bones creaking. He looked up at the enormous ships blocking the sky. His calm face did not change, but his eyes became even sharper, like a soldier who has heard a familiar, distant sound. A low hum started. It was not a sound you heard with your ears, but one you felt in your bones. It vibrated in the teeth and shivered up the spine. It grew until the windows in every building rattled softly. Then the world went silent. The hum vanished. But the silence that followed was worse. It was the silence of a world that had stopped breathing. Jin looked away from the window and around his classroom. The digital clock on the wall was dark. A teacher's computer screen was black. Someone tried to turn on the lights. Nothing happened. On the streets below, the change was more dramatic. Every car had stopped moving. They were just metal boxes sitting in the middle of the roads. Their engines were dead. The electric signs that usually flashed with bright colors were all dark. The constant noise of the city, the traffic, the music, the voices was gone. It was replaced by a stunned, fearful quiet, and then slowly by the rising sound of human panic. People poured out of buildings, looking up at the sky, pointing, their faces filled with fear and confusion. They pulled out their phones, but the screens were dark. They tried to start their cars, but the engines would not turn over. The aliens had not fired a single laser. They had not dropped a single bomb. They had simply pressed a button and turned off humanity's technology. On the bridge of the lead Veln ship, Commander Cathar watched the data streams on his own screen. He saw the heat signatures of millions of humans, the patterns of their movement changing from order to chaos. He saw the energy readings of the planet drop to almost zero. His long, thin fingers tapped a console. "Report," he said, his voice a dry, rustling sound. "The planetary suppression field is operational, Commander," a subordinate said. "All localized electrical and advanced combustion systems have been neutralized. The species is now isolated and immobilized." Cathar observed the view of the city below. Their reaction is within predicted parameters: panic, disorganization. They are like children whose toys have been taken away. Note it in the record. Species 7 Gamma is technologically dependent. The pacification phase is a success, he was sure of this. His people, the Veln Collective, had done this many times before. They found worlds with primitive intelligent life. showed them their power was meaningless and absorbed them into the collective without a fight. It was clean. It was logical. Down on the ground, the three humans were each dealing with the new world in their own way. Jin's classroom was in chaos. Students were crying. The teacher was trying to calm everyone, but her voice was shaky. Jin did not panic. He walked to the window and looked down. He saw the frozen cars. He saw people running. He saw the dark, silent ships. He was not thinking about fear. He was thinking about how it worked. How did they turn everything off? A wave? A signal? What is the range? He looked at the other buildings. Every window was just a dark hole. The entire city was blind. Miso was trapped in an elevator. When the power died, the elevator had stopped between floors. It was pitch black and stuffy. Around her, people were screaming, pounding on the walls. Her heart was beating fast. She took a deep breath. Panic will not help, she thought. She felt in her purse. Her fingers closed around a small metal pen. It was not much, but it was something. She remembered the emergency hatch in the ceiling of the elevator. She did not know if it would open, but it was a plan. A small, simple plan. Mr. Park started walking home. The streets were crowded with confused and angry people. He moved through them like a rock in a river. He saw a young man trying to kickstart a motorcycle. It was useless. He saw a shopkeeper standing in his dark doorway looking lost. Mr. Park did not stop. His apartment was not far. He knew he had a flashlight there, the old kind you had to shake. He also knew he had candles and a gas stove that might still work. He was thinking about practical things: water, food, safety. His mind, trained long ago, was already shifting from a time of peace to a time of survival. As night began to fall, the true depth of the silence settled over Seoul. There were no streetlights. There were no headlights. There were no lights in any window. The only light came from the moon and the stars and the cold, dark shapes of the alien ships that blotted them out. The Veln watched. They saw the humans lighting fires. They saw them gathering in groups. They saw the planet go dark. It was all going according to plan. They had examined Earth. They had seen the cars, the planes, the power grids. They had seen the guns and the armies. They thought they understood humanity's strength. They thought they had taken it away. They never stopped to examine what was left. They never anticipated that when you strip away the technology, you don't find a helpless child. You find something else. You find a creature that learned to survive in a world of predators with nothing but its wits and its will. They did not know that every human, from the quiet student to the tired office worker to the old man on the bench, carried a weapon inside them that no field could ever suppress. The night was cold, dark, and very, very quiet. But in that silence, a different kind of power was starting to wake up. The silence lasted through the night. The next morning, the sun rose on a different world. Seoul was a ghost of its former self. The streets, usually roaring with life by dawn, were now filled with a strange, quiet confusion. People moved slowly, their faces pale with worry in the cold morning light. They spoke in hushed voices as if afraid to disturb the giant ships that still hung, unmoving in the sky. On the bridge of the Veln command ship, Commander Cathar reviewed the overnight data. The planet-wide suppression field was holding. Human technology remained inert. His long fingers swiped through holographic reports showing declining energy signatures and disorganized population movement. Proceed with Phase 2, Cathar ordered, his voice a soft rasp. Deploy the observational drones. I want a full behavioral analysis. Let us see how they cope without their machines. Across the city, small silver orbs no larger than a human head detached from the mothership and descended. They moved with a silent, fluid grace, hovering over the streets like silent mechanical insects. Their single red lenses scanned everything, collecting data. Down below, the humans were indeed coping. Jin had spent the night in the school gym with the other students and teachers. As soon as the sun was up, he left. He walked through his neighborhood, his eyes taking in everything. He saw people forming lines at a public water pump that was still working. He saw a man trading a bag of rice for a box of candles. He saw a group of neighbors clearing the dead cars from an intersection to make a clear path. It was messy and people were scared, but they were not giving up. They were adapting. He felt a strange feeling in his chest. It was not quite fear. It was more like a puzzle. A very dangerous, very large puzzle. He looked up and saw one of the silver drones float past. It stopped for a moment, its red lens focusing on a group of children sharing a bottle of water. It recorded the scene, then moved on. Jin watched it carefully. It was observing them, studying them. Miso had managed to get out of the elevator. When the power had not returned after hours, a few people in the elevator had worked together. Using the metal pen from her purse and a key from another person, they had managed to pry the elevator doors open a crack. Then, with all their strength, they had forced them apart. They had to climb out into a dark hallway and feel their way down 20 flights of stairs. It had been long and frightening. Now she was in her small apartment. She was lucky. She had some bottled water and some canned food. Her building had a gas line for cooking, and when she lit a match, the stove burner caught fire. She could make hot water. It was a small victory, but it felt huge. She looked out her window. She saw the drones floating by. She saw one stop and watch a woman hanging wet clothes on her balcony to dry. The drone's unblinking red eye made her shiver. It felt like being watched by a predator. Mr. Park was in his apartment. It was a small, simple place, but he was prepared. He had his shaking flashlight, his candles, and his old camping stove. He had filled his bathtub with water last night. He was making a pot of tea when he heard a buzzing sound. He looked up. A silver drone was hovering just outside his window, its red lens pointed directly at him. Mr. Park did not wave. He did not look afraid. He simply stared back. His face was calm, but his mind was working. He saw how it moved. He saw the seam where its lens was housed. He saw the way it tilted slightly to keep him in view. He was not just being observed. He was being analyzed, and he did not like it. The drones continued their work. They were programmed to identify patterns of submission, despair, and social collapse. They were finding those things, but they were also finding anomalies. These anomalies were flagged and sent to Commander Cathar. The first report came in the afternoon. Commander, we have a loss. Scout Drone 734 in the Mapo district has gone offline. Its final signal was an overload in its optical sensor array. Cathar turned. Show me the final transmission. A grainy holographic video played. It showed a typical street. The drone was observing an old man, Mr. Park, on a balcony, watering a small plant. The scene was peaceful. Then the old man turned. He held a small handheld mirror. For a moment he seemed to be looking at his own reflection. Then, with a sudden, precise movement, he tilted the mirror. The sun, bright in the morning sky, reflected off the glass and hit the drone's lens. The video feed erupted in a blaze of white light before cutting to static. An accident, a subordinate suggested. Cathar replayed the footage. He watched the old man's movements. They were not the fumbling movements of someone surprised. They were deliberate, calculated. No, Cathar said softly. It was not an accident. He used a primitive tool to weaponize stellar radiation. Note it. Subject Park, human male, advanced age. Demonstrates high threat awareness and resource-based tactical aggression. A second report came an hour later. Commander, another anomaly. In the Gangnam district, a group of humans, led by a female designated Miso, has established a resource distribution point. The video showed Miso. She was helping organize people, handing out cups of water from a large pot she had boiled. A drone moved in to get a closer scan of the operation. It hovered over a tangle of wires and broken electronics that had been swept into a pile. Suddenly, the drone shuddered. Its systems flickered. It dropped a few feet before stabilizing and quickly flying away. What happened? Cathar demanded. The drone passed over a concentration of uncapped active electrical wires. The humans appear to have rigged a power source from a car battery. The residual charge created a localized electromagnetic disturbance. It was a minor event, but it could have damaged the drone systems. Cathar leaned closer. Did they know? Did they create that hazard on purpose? The probability is low, Commander. It was most likely careless disposal of waste. But Cathar was not sure. He watched Miso on the screen. She looked up as the drone flew away. For a split second before her face returned to a mask of helpful calm, he thought he saw something else in her eyes. A flicker of satisfaction. The final report of the day involved Jin. A drone was observing a group of teenagers who were trying to push a car. Jin was among them, but he was not pushing. He was pointing at the car's wheels, then at a piece of wood lying nearby. He seemed to be explaining how to use the wood as a lever. The drone focused on him, analyzing his speech patterns and gestures. Jin stopped talking. He felt the drone's gaze. He turned and looked directly at it. He did not glare. He did not look away. He studied it. He tilted his head, his eyes tracing its shape. He pointed at it and said something to the other boys. Then he slowly raised his hand, forming his fingers into the shape of a gun. He pointed it at the drone and mouthed a single silent word. Bang. The drone's threat assessment sensor registered a minor spike, but it was not a physical threat. It was something the algorithms struggled to categorize. It was a psychological challenge. Commander Cathar reviewed the three incidents together. The old man who turned sunlight into a weapon. The woman whose carelessness created a dangerous trap. The boy who challenged a machine with a gesture. He stood from his command chair and walked to the main viewing port. The dark planet stretched out below him. The cities were dark. The humans were supposed to be helpless. His science officer approached. The data is confusing, Commander. Their overall society is fracturing as predicted, but these individual cases, their threat assessment is not group-based. It appears to be individual. Every subject is developing unique countermeasures. They are not behaving logically. Cathar stared at the silent dark earth. For the first time, a sliver of doubt entered his mind. They had come to pacify a planet of children who had lost their toys. But what if they were not children? What if they were something else entirely? Down on the ground, night was falling again. Jin looked at the stars between the alien ships, thinking about their technology. Miso checked the locks on her door, her mind already planning for tomorrow's challenges. Mr. Park sat in his dark apartment, sharpening a long kitchen knife on a stone. The rhythmic scrape a quiet promise in the dark. The examination was underway, and the subjects were starting to fight back. The days blurred into a week. A new grim routine settled over Seoul. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a dull, constant anxiety. People were hungry. The food from refrigerators had spoiled, and supplies in shops were running low. The once orderly lines for water were becoming tense. The silver drones were a constant presence, a humming reminder that they were being watched, studied like insects in a jar. On the Velm ship, Commander Cathar was growing impatient. The pacification was not proceeding as smoothly as his reports to High Command claimed. The humans were not breaking. They were bending, adapting in ways his models could not predict. The anomalies were increasing. He needed to force a conclusion. He needed to demonstrate beyond any doubt the futility of their resistance. "It is time for a direct demonstration," Cathar announced to his bridge crew. "We will show them the difference between their primitive defiance and our absolute power. Send a single warrior to the central plaza. Its orders are to subdue a large group. It will use non-lethal force. It will make them kneel." On the ground, a different kind of organization was taking root. In Miso's apartment building, she had become a leader. She organized a cooking schedule, using her gas stove to make large pots of soup from donated canned goods. She knew it wasn't just about food. It was about giving people a purpose, a small piece of normalcy. Jin had found his purpose too. He wasn't strong, so he couldn't help move heavy things. But he was smart. He walked through the neighborhood, his eyes missing nothing. He noticed which buildings had accessible rooftops. He noted where people had stored rainwater in buckets. He saw the patterns the drones flew, their preferred routes. He would come back to the community and share what he saw. He was becoming their eyes. Mr. Park did not talk much, he worked. He helped a group of men build a large rainwater collector from a torn awning and some plastic pipes. His movements were slow but incredibly efficient. He showed a young couple how to barricade their ground floor window without nails, using only furniture and rope. He was becoming their hands. That afternoon, a crowd had gathered in the large, open plaza near City Hall. A rumor had spread that a truck full of rice and medical supplies had been found and was going to be distributed there. Hundreds of people were there, hopeful and desperate. Miso was there, helping to organize the line. Jin was there, watching from the steps of a bank building, observing the crowd. Mr. Park was there, standing near the back, his sharp eyes scanning the sky. He did not like such a large open space. From the belly of the mothership, a small craft detached. It flew down and landed silently in the very center of the plaza. The crowd fell silent, pulling back in fear. A hatch opened. A single Velen warrior stepped out. It was tall, over 7 feet, encased in sleek gray armor that seemed to absorb the light. It carried a long, rod-like weapon. Its helmet was featureless except for a dark visor. It was the embodiment of cold alien power. It did not speak. It simply raised its weapon and fired a bright blue pulse of energy into the air. The crackling sound made everyone flinch. The warrior then pointed its weapon at the front of the crowd. It gestured with its free hand, a clear universal command, "Kneel." Panic erupted. People screamed and tried to run, but the crowd was too dense. The warrior fired its weapon again, this time at the feet of the people in the front. A wave of energy shot out, not killing them, but throwing them to the ground, their bodies twitching and numb. It was a stun ray. A tool for control. The message was clear: submit or be disabled. From his perch, Jin's mind raced. The armor looked seamless. The weapon was energy-based. He saw no obvious weak points, but he kept looking. He saw the way the warrior's head turned, scanning the crowd. He saw the joints at the knees and elbows. They were protected, but they were still joints. Miso was frozen near the front. She saw people falling, crying out in pain and fear. The alien was getting closer, its weapon pointing, its hand gesturing, "Kneel." Her heart hammered in her chest. She wanted to run, but her feet felt like stone. Mr. Park at the back began to move. He did not run away. He moved sideways, slipping through the edge of the crowd, his body low. He was heading for the buildings that surrounded the plaza. He had an idea. In the chaos, a little girl became separated from her mother. It was Sumin, Jin's cheerful neighbor from his apartment building. She was crying, lost and terrified in the swirling mass of legs. She stumbled forward, right into the open space in front of the Veln warrior. The warrior looked down at the small, crying human. It was an easy target. It would secure this one first. It took a step towards her, its large armored hand reaching out. "Leave her alone." The voice was not loud, but it was clear. It was Jin. He had climbed down from the steps and was now standing between the warrior and Sumin. He was just a skinny boy in a faded sweatshirt. He looked incredibly small and fragile in front of the giant alien. The warrior paused, its blank visor turning to him. It was an unexpected variable. Jin did not have a weapon. He did not clench his fists. He just stood there, his hands at his sides. He looked directly into the dark visor as if he could see the creature inside. "Your left knee joint," Jin said, his voice surprisingly steady. "The plating overlaps downwards. That means it's probably vulnerable to an upward force." The warrior froze. Its internal translators processed the words. This was not a scream of fear. This was a tactical analysis. "You keep your weight centered," Jin continued, his eyes never leaving the warrior. "That's good for stability. But it makes you slow to pivot to your right, and the seam on your helmet just below the visor on the left side. It looks like a sensory port, is it?" Inside his helmet, the Veln warrior felt a confusion it had never known. This was not combat. This was dissection. The human was not fighting him. He was taking him apart with words. The warrior's training had not prepared him for this. Its grip on its weapon loosened slightly. That split second of hesitation was all Mr. Park needed. He had made it to a rooftop overlooking the plaza. In his hands was a simple weapon he had made. A powerful sling, the kind used for centuries, made from a strong piece of cloth and leather. He loaded it not with a stone, but with a sharp triangular shard of ceramic from a broken toilet he had found. He took aim. He was not aiming at the warrior's body. He was aiming for the small glowing port at the end of its weapon. He let the shard fly. It whistled through the air, a primitive projectile in a world of energy weapons. It was not fast enough to be detected by the warrior's automated defenses. It was just a piece of rock, moving in a simple, predictable arc. It struck true. The ceramic shard jammed itself perfectly into the barrel of the stun ray. The warrior, still confused by Jin's words, looked down at its weapon. It tried to fire. There was a loud fizzling sound, a burst of sparks, and the weapon went dark, overloaded by the blockage. The warrior was now disarmed. A roar went up from the crowd. The fear that had paralyzed them shattered. The giant was not invincible. The alien took a step back, its confidence broken. It looked from the boy who had dissected it with his mind, to the crowd that was now advancing with angry shouts, to its own useless weapon. The demonstration had failed completely. On the Veln ship, Commander Cathar watched the entire event unfold on his screen. He saw the warriors retreat. He saw the humans, who were supposed to be kneeling in submission, now standing tall, their faces filled with a new emotion. Not fear, but defiant hope. He had sent a warrior to pacify a crowd. He had expected to fight soldiers. Instead, he had encountered a strategist, an engineer, and a child who refused to be afraid. They had not used guns or bombs. They had used a mirror, a sling, and words. Cathar turned away from the screen. The silence on high. The failure in the plaza sent a shockwave through the Veln command. On the ground, it sent a different kind of wave through the people of Seoul. The story spread like fire. The boy who stared down the giant. The old man who broke its weapon with a piece of rock. They were not just stories. They were proof. The aliens could be beaten. Commander Cathar stood on the bridge, the image of the failed demonstration burning in his mind. The human boy's calm, analytical voice played over and over. The precise throw of the old man's weapon. It was not luck. It was not a fluke. It was a pattern his logic could not process. His crew waited in silence, afraid of his reaction. He did not yell. His voice was quiet, cold with a fury that was more terrifying than any shout. The anthropological data. Bring me all of it. Not their technology. I want their history, their myths, their art. I want to know what these creatures are. While Cathar delved into the digital ghosts of human culture, the city below was transforming. The shared experience in the plaza had broken down the last walls of isolation. People were no longer just surviving in small groups. They were uniting. Miso's small cooking operation in her apartment building became a central kitchen for the whole neighborhood. People brought what little food they had, and she organized a team to cook it into a single large meal for everyone. It was not enough to be full, but it was enough to keep people going. More importantly, it gave them a common purpose. She became a hub, a calm voice of organization in the chaos. She was using her skill not for a company, but for her community. Jin found his value. He started holding small, quiet meetings on a rooftop. He would draw diagrams in the dust with a stick. He showed people how to spot the drone's blind spots. He explained how to use reflections to signal each other without the drone's understanding. He taught them how to identify weak points in structures, how to set simple traps using wires and weights. He was not a warrior. He was a teacher. He was sharing the weapon of knowledge. Mr. Park's apartment became a different kind of workshop. He did not talk much, he showed. A young man brought him a heavy pipe. Mr. Park took it, felt its weight, and then with a few precise strikes against a ledge, he bent one end into a cruel hook. It was no longer a pipe. It was a tool for pulling an enemy off balance. A woman showed him a long kitchen knife. He took a whetstone and showed her the correct angle to sharpen it, not for slicing vegetables but for piercing. He taught a group how to fight together, how to use their numbers against a single, stronger opponent. He was not teaching them to be soldiers. He was teaching them to be survivors. The three of them, without ever planning it, became the heart of a new resistance. Miso fed their bodies and their spirit. Jin sharpened their minds. Mr. Park hardened their bodies. The entire district was slowly turning into a single thinking organism, learning how to defend itself. High above, Commander Cathar was lost in a nightmare. He had bypassed the files on human engineering and physics. He had plunged into their true nature. He read about their history, an endless cycle of wars and recoveries. He saw images of their art full of struggle and triumph. He listened to their music, which could be both terribly sad and fiercely brave. He learned about David and Goliath, a story of a small boy defeating a giant. He read about the Trojan horse, a story of winning through deception and cleverness. He saw the relentless, grinding endurance they called the human spirit. It was not a poetic idea. It was a biological fact. His science officer stood beside him, the data glowing between them. The analysis is complete, Commander. We were wrong. Their evolutionary path was not about creating better tools. It was about surviving better conflicts. His bridge was heavy. The plan was unraveling, and he did not know why. Cathar stared at a screen showing a human child. Explain. Look at their biology, Commander. They are persistence hunters. They did not outsprint their prey. They outlasted it. They can endure pain and exhaustion that would kill most species. Their minds are problem-solving engines, wired for pattern recognition and tactical innovation from infancy. Their play is combat training. Their stories are manuals for defeating stronger foes. A Veln is a weapon only when issued one and given an order. A human is a weapon by default. Their mind is the chamber. Their will is the firing pin. And their environment, anything they can touch, see, or think of, becomes the projectile. Cathar finally understood. The suppression field had not taken away their weapons. It had simply forced them to use the ones they were born with. He looked down at the dark planet. He no longer saw cities and resources. He saw a hive of 5 billion armed and loaded warheads. Each one was different. Each one was unpredictable. The boy in the plaza, Cathar said, his voice hollow. He was not brave. He was using his primary weapon, analysis. The old man was using his resourcefulness and precision. The woman organizing the food. She is using social cohesion as a weapon. She is making them stronger together. The science officer was silent for a moment. Their official military is irrelevant, Commander. The civilian population, they are the true military, and we have just woken them up. On the ground, the change was complete. The people in the neighborhood moved with a new confidence. They had a system. They had lookouts using Jin's mirror signals. They had gatherers bringing supplies to Miso's kitchen. They had defenders training with Mr. Park. They were no longer victims waiting for rescue. They were a community preparing for a fight. They had discovered the Terran doctrine. It was not written in a book. It was written in their blood and their bones. It was the simple, terrifying truth that a human being, stripped of everything, is never unarmed. They are the weapon, and the Veln had just handed them a reason to use it. The understanding that settled over Commander Cathar was cold and heavy, like a stone in his stomach. He stood at the viewing port looking down at the dark Earth. It was no longer a planet to be conquered. It was a trap. The silence from the surface was no longer the silence of defeat. It was the silence of a predator waiting in the tall grass. An urgent communication chimed. It was a direct order from the Veln High Command. The message was short and brutal. The glyphs glowed red in the dim light of the bridge. Species 7 Gamma designated an existential threat. Full-scale planetary purge is authorized. Commence immediate orbital bombardment. Leave no life signs, Cathar read the order. His crew looked at him, waiting for the command that would unleash fire and turn the world below into a burning cinder. He did not give it. He turned back to the view. He saw the city of Sol. He imagined the boy, Jin, looking up at the sky with those analytical eyes. He imagined the old man, Mr. Park, calmly sharpening a piece of metal. He imagined the woman, Miso, uniting people with a shared meal, a purge, to kill every last one of them. His logical mind played out the scenario. They would begin bombardment. They would destroy the major population centers. But what then? Millions would die, yes, but billions more lived in smaller towns in the countryside, in places their ships could not easily target. To complete the purge, they would have to land. They would have to send Veln warriors into the streets, into the forests, into the mountains. And that was the trap. To land would be to enter a world where every shadow could hold a threat, where every quiet street could be an ambush, where every old woman could be hiding a knife and every child could be a scout. The humans would not fight a war. They would fight 1,000 million small, terrible wars. They would use the ruins of their cities as a weapon. They would use the land itself. They would fight from the sewers and the rooftops. They would never, ever surrender. The cost would be unimaginable. The Veln fleet would be bled dry. For every human they killed, they would lose a warrior. For every city they burned, they would lose a ship to some desperate, clever attack. The humans had shown him that they did not need to win a battle to win a war. They just needed to make the war too costly to fight. He thought of the report. Their mind is the chamber. Their will is the firing pin. He could not order the bombardment. It would not be a victory. It would be the act of poking a hornet's nest with a stick, only to discover the hornets were made of acid and rage. Commander? His second-in-command asked, his voice tense. The order. Cathar took a long, slow breath. The logic was inescapable. The only way to win was to not play their game. The only way to survive was to leave. Recall all drones, Cathar said, his voice firm and final. Power all systems for immediate departure. A stunned silence filled the bridge. Commander! High Command has ordered a purge. We will not be purging anything, Cathar interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. To engage is to lose. They are not a civilization. They are a condition, a plague of will. We are leaving. Now. Below, in the growing darkness of evening, Jin stood on his rooftop. Miso was beside him, having just finished helping clean the communal pots. Mr. Park stood a little ways off, his gaze fixed on the sky. Little Sumin was there too, holding Miso's hand. The people in the streets had stopped what they were doing. They felt a change in the air. The constant low hum that had been the background of their lives for over a week was shifting in pitch. Then the lights came on. It was just a flicker at first. A single street lamp on a distant hill sputtered to life, casting a weak yellow glow. Then another. And another. All over the city, lights began to blink on in windows. A car alarm suddenly wailed into the night, its battery somehow revived. The world was waking up. Jin looked up. The massive ships, which had been as still as mountains, were now moving. Their dark surfaces began to glow with lines of blue and white energy. They were turning slowly at first, then faster, pointing away from Earth. "They're leaving," Miso whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. Mr. Park said nothing. He just watched, his body still tense, as if expecting a trick. High above, the Veln fleet gathered. Then, in a silent, breathtaking flash of light, the enormous ships vanished. They did not fly away. They simply disappeared, leaving behind only the empty, star-filled sky. The silence that followed was different from before. It was not the silence of death and fear. It was the silence of awe. Then it was broken. A cheer started somewhere in the distance, a single voice of pure joy. It was picked up by another, and another, until the whole city was roaring with the sound of its own survival. Jin did not cheer. He looked at the stars where the ships had been. He felt no happiness, only a cold weight on his shoulders. The galaxy knew about them now. They knew what humans could do. The next visitors might not be so cautious. The next visitors might come ready for a fight. Miso put a hand on his shoulder. "We're safe," she said, her voice soft. "For now," Jin replied, his eyes still on the stars. Mr. Park finally turned away from the sky. He looked at the people celebrating in the streets below. He looked at the lights coming back on in the buildings. He saw the hope on their faces. He knew, as Jin knew, that the world had changed forever. They had learned the most important lesson a species can learn. Their greatest strength was not outside of them, in their machines and their cities. It was inside. It was the unbreakable, adaptable, and terrifying will of every single human being. The fight was over. But a new chapter had just begun. They were no longer just people of Earth. They were a warning to the stars.